Welcome to the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. I'm your host, Desiree Stanley, here to share some amazing conversations. We're talking business, health, making and saving money, or starting something epic. Think of this as your go-to spot for stories that do a lot more than just kill time. They spark ideas, give you a boost, and perhaps even change the way you look at the world. I'm pulling in the experts, the thinkers, the doers, and the dreamers. We're about to dive into stories that open doors and ideas that light up your brain. Here we go. Welcome, everyone, to the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. I'm your host, Desiree Stanley, and with me today is my guest, Jen Aks. How are you today, Jen?
I'm great. So excited to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful. And I am so excited to have you on. I am thrilled that we're having this conversation, and I cannot wait for the listeners to hear about your journey and all of the wonderful information that you have to share with us today. So thank you again. And Jen, you've got to tell us, how did her stories come to be? What sort of led you on this path to developing this? And what was your journey like? So if you would share that with us, take it away.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. What's interesting, her stories doesn't really represent what this body of work is at this point. As a business owner, entrepreneur, you start your journey one way and it evolves and it becomes something else. And so it's interesting to hear that reflected back. That is the name of my company. However, I also work with a lot of men at this point. And so it's interesting. I'm like, maybe, but no one really hears that so much anymore. But anyhow, so how it came to be, this journey is so incredible to me because it really kind of took me over. It wasn't anything that I planned. It just happened so organically. So I'm really excited to share it with you and your listeners. I guess I'll start with this. When I was younger in school, I had this limited understanding of what intelligence really meant. And my work so much reflects now on all the ways in which we learn, all the ways into how we can process and develop as humans through our educational journey and so on. And when I was younger, I was told that if you don't score high on your SATs or your IQ tests, then you don't measure up. And I never felt smart enough because I didn't do well on either of those things. And school was hard for me only because it was taught in such a logical manner. It was very linear, and there was no room for another form of connection in academia. So I really kind of was looked over. And through those two sort of thought processes, I developed this story about myself that I just wasn't smart enough. And so I went through my journey of a couple decades of like real debilitation. I was really ashamed of where I was with my SATs. I actually wound up going to NYU, which is a great college, but I just started off at a junior college first. But anyhow, I thought being smart was like, you got to do great on tests. You got to do great in school. You got to score high on these things. And and that mentality, of course, held me back from a lot of things, a lot of opportunities. Throughout that journey, I found dance, and dance was this incredible form of connection that I felt with myself and also with others, but it wasn't really named intelligent at that time. So I just kind of was like, oh, I love to dance. I love to perform. I'm good at this, but I never looked at it as intelligent. And then in my late 20s, I had this incredible invitation to a dinner with a very high profile celebrity type. He was JFK Jr., John F. Kennedy's son. And I was invited to a dinner with him with a boyfriend. And it was a very intimate dinner. And this was one of those opportunities where I basically said no, because I didn't think I was good enough, smart enough, worthy enough. And that decline of that invitation really took me down. And that evening, I said no to my boyfriend. I never told him why, because at that time I was very ashamed of what I thought about myself. And that night hit rock bottom, and I was in the shower, I remember, and I was I was curled up in a little ball, and I had this presence came over me and basically was like, get up and go figure yourself out. You are way more than this. And that experience lasted a while, and I got up, and that week I found this woman who introduced me to the work of Howard Gardner and the multiple forms of intelligence. And when I learned that there were multiple forms of intelligence. Initially, I cried because I thought how different my life would look had I known that there was something called kinesthetic intelligence, which is the language of the body, which is the ability to understand self and others through the body, to understand curriculum through the body. And if a teacher had kind of expressed this to me, my life would have been really different. I don't regret anything because it brought me where I am now. I spent many, many years learning about the multiple forms of intelligence and really connecting to the forms that I am, which is kinesthetic, interpersonal, and intrapersonal. And as a movement practitioner and dance educator for over 30 years, I've blended the two, the research of multiple intelligence and my expertise in movement and the wisdom of the body. And I created the power of gesture, which is what we'll talk about today. But that is like the summary of how I got to this. And I'll just say that it is absolutely my mission to help awaken people to the multiple forms of intelligence. And for me, especially emotional, because we all share it and we all can tap in and develop it. And it really is helpful in our life. And I'm sure we'll talk about why. But that's how I got here.
Thank you so much, Jen, for sharing that story and detailing the process of how you got to where you are now. And I think many of us have experienced that limiting self belief because we didn't do well on tests in school. And that trajectory that we can go on because we just think we're not good enough because we didn't score well. And really, I mean, test taking is a skill in itself. And a lot of people don't have that skill because they have other skills. And
Right.
that's really what you're talking about is how do you tap into the skills that are innate in you and where can your life go if you really are tapping into that? And so you're really a leadership and embodiment coach and educator. And this is your life's mission now, right? Is at bringing this to the masses, as many people as you can, so that they can begin to tap into that, right? And grow their life in a way that's meaningful and makes sense to them.
Beautifully said. That's exactly
Yeah.
that's exactly
Awesome.
what I'm doing. Yeah.
I love it. And so you're here today to really dive into all that with us. And so let's talk about how you mentioned Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences. And I know that you did kind of tick off a few of them, but what are all of the different ones? And maybe share some detail about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one is the one I think we're all really familiar with. It might not have been named this, growing up, but it's logical and mathematical. He kind of puts those two together. And it's that's what's highlighted when we grow up. Being able to analyze problems and really dig into mathematical equations and excel in reasoning. And these people that really gravitate to this form of intelligence wind up being, not always, but wind up being scientists and mathematicians and engineers. And then another form of intelligence is linguistic. Linguistic is all about words and the use of language to express with rhythm. Someone that really appreciates complex meanings and moving words around and being really creative within that. And that's a lot of people that have that ability wind up writers, authors, same thing, readers, teachers, right? They kind of fall into that category. Someone that's poets, right, would also be in there. Spatial intelligence is also another form, and that's like the ability to really think in 3D, people that can look at space and navigate space in an interesting way. And you find a lot of architects have this strong ability, this strong intelligence. And then there's something that I mentioned, which is kinesthetic, which is what I really gravitate to. Someone that's connected to the body, that learns through the body, that understands how the body functions and feels naturally able to move through life in that way. And so a lot of dancers and a lot of athletes, right, have this kinesthetic intelligence. Then there's musical, which is someone who really has the skill of performance and composition and appreciates musical patterns. And these are, singers and composers and musicians. And then there's interpersonal, which is really about understanding the emotions of others, understanding how to navigate groups, people, dynamics. So a lot of leadership. I mean, this can be developed too. This is why it's so important. And it's involved, emotions fall into this category. So we're going to get to the blend. The next one is intrapersonal, which is really understanding your own emotions, being able to manage them when they show up. Someone that has the ability to like tap into different methodologies easily to kind of process. And when you put those two together, interpersonal and intrapersonal, it really makes up the holistic idea of emotional intelligence, which Daniel Goleman really focuses on. And that's where that is my specialty, emotional intelligence, and really looking at inter and intra and helping people develop this emotional intelligence so that they can be strong leaders in their families, not just with themselves, but with their families, with the teams that they work with, and just being leaders in their life. There's also naturalistic intelligence, which is someone who can look at the environment and really has connection to the environment and sees patterns within the environment. And a lot of those people wind up becoming biologists. So there's a lot. And I've actually created this one sheet because just for people to be able to glance, it's like an at a glance, the intelligences. And I just think it's really important because I may not focus on all of them. I do a little bit, but I really emphasize the emotional because it's connected to the movement and my methodology. But just to awaken that idea that, oh, I'm a musician. I understand musical patterns. I have a skill of performance. I'm intelligent. Just putting that word really can help people deepen their confidence, or awaken their
Yeah.
confidence.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Jen, that was excellent. Thank you for the detail on all of that. I
Yeah.
so appreciate it. And it just made me think that we have to remember it takes everyone to make the world work, right? We've got to have all of these different
Right.
personality types and emotional intelligent types. We've got to have all of it for it to be cohesive, right? We can't all be engineers. We can't all be mathematicians or
Right.
architects, right?
Right.
We have to have the differences for it all to work. And so I think that's such a great reminder that we are all valuable in what we have to bring to the
Yep.
table.
Yep. Yep. I totally agree. And I hope as parents, we want to instill that in our children. As teachers, we need to instill that too. And I think that it's so important for teachers to be armed with this information so that when they are looking at these children that are not their own, but are children that they are teaching, future leaders of the next generation, they need to know about this. It really can help people kind of move through school in a much more confident way, being able to embrace all these forms and expressing exactly that sentiment of it takes all of us. So you might do really well on tests and you might not, and it's okay. Giving that permission, like it's okay. We're going to find your form of intelligence.
Yeah. When you think about how many kids are just like crammed into this one system
Yeah.
and they think they're a failure or they look like a failure, they're maybe not doing well scholastically because they're not intended to be shoved into this one format of learning.
Yeah.
And so, like you're saying, if we can recognize that there's these other ways that people process and learn, what a difference it could make for the development of these children and not just their self confidence and self esteem, but what they can bring to the world. So I think that's amazing.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I totally agree with everything you said. And part of my story, which is relevant to what you're saying, I'm just gonna bring it up. After I became awakened and started learning about all of this, I found an organization that really teaches embodied learning. And they don't call it that, but I call it that because I know now that it was embodied learning. And basically, we taught and I did this work for 18 years and I still do it. I still train teachers to do this work. We're teaching children curriculum through the body. We're teaching them about geography with their body, through poetry, through music, through dance, all of it. And this organization had been around forever and ever. And I found it, and it really just took me on a journey for 18 years because it really actually healed me from my own stuff to say, wow, like this is what I needed, but also to really empower these children. And I worked with literally thousands of children all over the country for 18 years doing this work. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, everybody should be doing this to empower children with curriculum in multiple ways. Like you're saying, there's so many ways to learn, and we need to be able to teach in a variety of ways to reach different children. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Great stuff. Well, I'm so glad you found that organization that helped you and then
Yeah.
carried on with that work to help so many others and continue to do that now. And so I think it's fantastic. So thank you for what
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah.
Can we talk now a little bit about how do we identify the strongest sort of intelligence that we have within ourselves? How do we figure out what that is for us?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think what really happens is when people understand the first step is looking at a list like this, let's just say, or knowing what they are. There's about 9 of them. It's not this long, huge list. It's very simple and accessible to look at each one. And you can feel it. For me, it's all about the body. And it's all about what does your body resonate with. So when you're reading linguistic and you're understanding that this is someone that loves vocabulary of words and playing with words and creating poetry and lyrics to a song, that's you, right? That's you. When you read about kinesthetic and the body's wisdom or whatever the intelligence is, that's the first indication. When you are when you feel this pull towards something. When it comes to interpersonal and intrapersonal, these are all about emotions, right? So that high emotional intelligence, I feel a big indicator around, do I have this? Is this something that is natural to me? Everyone can access it. We're all born with the vocabulary of emotions and we just experience them in different ways. And we can absolutely spend time tuning them up and getting more in tune with all of, but if you're someone that people come to for advice, if you find that friends and family and just peers, people you work with, they come to you to say, "How do I get through this? I love your intuition. You have a high capacity for understanding emotional experiences and the emotions that run not only within yourself but within others." So your question is like, how do we identify? And I think the first thing is really looking at the list and seeing where your body is pulled towards. And it becomes pretty obvious. And the key, I think, for me is when you find the one or the few, I have a few in there. When you resonate with that, then it's like, oh, then you start pouring yourself in. I always say when I'm talking to some people, I often say, if you're walking around with self-doubt and insecurity and just this overwhelming feeling of unworthiness, let's just say, I really invite people to start with this concept because I think intelligence is really at the root of so much of our self-doubt. So if we can look at that and then say, okay, I know that I'm smart and I'm curious to find out what this is. Then you start and you look at the list and you see what your body says and feels pulled towards, and then you go in through that lens. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, it does. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I think that is a great suggestion and super easy for us to do, right? It's just
Yeah.
examine the information for the different types of intelligences and see. And for people who maybe are, more of the mathematic, it may not necessarily come from the body, right? It may be something in logically for them. This sounds like me. This sounds like how
That's
I
right.
think and process information. And
That's
so
right.
recognizing that too may not come from the body for
Yeah.
those particular types of people, but I think it's
Yes.
something that all of us can do.
Yeah,
to
and I
just
think
begin.
even when it comes from the head, that's still your body. You
True,
know,
true.
when you're looking at it, if your mind, if anything in you, mind, body, soul, is pulling you towards something that feels resonant, and you're like, oh, logical and mathematical, whether that's the mind or the body or the soul, your body will tell you, your mind will tell you what feels right, what feels aligned. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. You're absolutely right. The mind is part of the body as well. So it's not separate. It's not sitting out here and the rest of us is over here. It is all one complete piece.
Yeah.
Okay. Can we talk a little bit now about how you developed the power of gesture and tell the listeners what that means,
Yeah.
how it came to be, and what you're doing now with that to help others?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Thank you. I love this work so much. And it really was, it just poured through my soul or moved through my soul. It was during the pandemic. And at this point, I had been a teacher for over 30 years. I had done all that embodied learning and teaching and all the things that I mentioned. And then here we are in isolation behind these screens. And as a real empath and someone who really, really, really deeply cares about people staying connected to their truths, I felt this call to just start talking to people online. No one had anything to do, so why not? Right. So I'm reaching out. I knew that it had something to do with movement. I knew it had something to do with healing. I knew it had something to do with celebrating where we are, even with this isolation, like our stories, really. And like what led us here, what got us here. So one person led to another, led to another, led to another. And what happened was in these conversations, we'd be like this in a square. And I didn't want the people, as they were telling me about their stories, I knew it wasn't just a verbal conversation. I wanted them to move the emotions that came up. I wanted them to move it through their body. But I didn't want them to get up and do this whole dance thing because they would be too far away. It was important to me to stay locked in and close to their eyes so I could really feel the energy as much as possible. So, as they would tell me about how they were feeling, whether it was about COVID itself or their life journey, emotions would come up and I would start to ask them to embody their emotions with a gesture, with a hand gesture. So, if they were frustrated, maybe their hands were like this, or if they were calm, their hands maybe came here, or so in their head and shameful, just these beautiful gestures that were coming through. And I was in awe and amazed at how people would embody these emotions so beautifully and artistically. As a dancer and performer for my whole life, I was like, wow, this is gorgeous movement. And one thing led to another, and I wound up having these very long, deep conversations with people, at the time, only women. And I'm also an editor. So took the Zoom footage that would be about an hour to an hour and a half long, and I would edit them down, these stories, to about 5 minutes, put a piece of instrumental music underneath, and ask them to send me some additional footage based on the work that we did. And I created, in about a year and a half, 150 short form video documentaries representing stories of resiliency and survival through this work with gesture. And because I said so often, there's so much power in gesture, there's so much power, it just was like, this is the thing, this is the methodology. So that's how the power of gesture came to be. And it really is, a lot of people will say, this is so healing because we're making intangible emotions tangible. We're bringing them out. We can look and feel and shape and move and manage how much space these emotions take up to then move it through, become awakened, and understand our emotions, the emotional intelligence inside of us, and make room for new possibility and get really locked into who we are as a person and really start to celebrate our life and the journey that we have been on. So celebration is a real big ingredient in my practice. So that's how the power of gesture came to be. And when the doors opened and COVID took a back seat, I wound up going in person a lot. So I do in person and virtual. But the one other thing I just want to say is those video documentaries that I created That's what became the Her Stories collection. And that's when I incorporated, and it was called Her Stories, right? Just to like circle back to the very beginning. There's been tremendous evolution since then, working with men and also teenagers as well. So it's expanded beyond that, but that's how it started.
That's amazing. Wow. I've got to dig into seeing those documentaries because that sounds tremendous. And I
Yeah.
love that idea because we do store so much emotion in our body, right? In so many places. But as you shared, when you can use your hands and your arms and everything to gesture what you're experiencing, and that moves that emotion and that energy through your body, you can get that out, so to speak, and then begin healing, right?
Yeah, and understand it is really the key, like facing it and understanding it without shame. For me, that shame story that I carried, that intelligent, that I had to unlock that with my methodology. It's part of how it came to be is I was working through my own emotions, right? And when we understand ourselves, then we can find that confidence and that clarity. And that's why the leadership coach piece is really important and at the top. It's leadership and embodiment. I mean, they're both equal too, but leadership with all parts, all aspects of our life. And the only way to really, I feel, to be a really, to be authentic in your leadership in whatever aspect it is, personal or professional, we got to know ourselves first. We've got to know how we feel, how we want to lead, what we care about and what we don't care about, and what matters to us will inform how we lead others. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, fantastic, Jen. I absolutely agree. And, it made me think of we think that we're not leaders because maybe we don't have a leadership title in our job or whatever. We're not leading a company or some organization, but we may be leading our family, right? We may be leading our community and we don't realize it. It's a
Right.
leadership position, but really, anytime we're trying to influence somebody to do something, that's a leadership role, right? And
Absolutely.
so to your point, understanding yourself and all of what you've got to offer and kind of tying all this together makes you a better leader in whatever area or aspect it is for your life. And that's just going to touch on other people's lives and that ripple effect, right?
Yeah. Absolutely, 100%. And I think it's really important. That's why I highlight it so much. And we're not only also leading others, whether it's a friend, a business person, whatever, we're leading ourselves. And that's where it starts. We have to lead from within. We have to know how we want to lead ourselves first. And I don't think that we look at leadership in that holistic approach. It's in all areas of our life.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Oh my gosh, this has been fantastic, Jen. So good. Really, I love it. So let's talk a little bit about how, as we're understanding our emotional intelligence and what sparks us to really the areas that we can see we are aligning with in the different types, how do we use that in maybe practical steps to grow out from maybe this little scared shell that we're in because all these years maybe we felt inferior or unworthy or not smart enough. How do we begin to grow from that using these?
Yeah. Well, like I had said, for me, I specialize in emotional intelligence. So it would be my suggestion would be doing the power of gesture, right? Because it's accessible, it's simple, it's you can use it anytime. I'm constantly finding myself getting up and excusing myself from a table, a party, or whatever. And I go into a bathroom and I do a gesture that represents what I'm feeling. And then the breakthrough moment of me wanting to break free of whatever is holding me back in that moment. So so starting with the power of gesture for those forms, and the other forms, I think it's about really feeling into what resonates most and then recognizing that what you've got is intelligence. So if you are someone who I'm just going to the musical thing, I think because I had a guitar lesson last night. But if I'm someone that's actually good, which I'm not really good, and I'm like, "Oh, wait, I'm playing, I'm good. People like hearing me. I'm going to lean into that more. So then you practice whatever it is that you feel most aligned with. If you are all of a sudden hearing this and saying, I do walk outside and feel connected to nature in very interesting ways. I do see patterns and understand the science behind whatever it might be, bodies of water, trees, birds. I love looking at birds and seeing what the different types and the relationships between it. If that's you and you never looked at it as intelligent, then it's about that awakening. And then you just lean into that more. That's the door that needs to be opened in order to walk through, because we need that push. We need that push of, no, this is something. So it's practicing whatever form is most resonant. And again, when it comes to those other three, for me, leadership and it taps into the three that we talked about regarding emotional, it would be the power of gesture. And if it's not the power of gesture, it's yoga. It's something with your body. It's meditation. Meditation is such a beautiful opening for people. A great suggestion I have is looking at one intelligence at a time and meditating on it and seeing if it lands. So taking linguistic. So you read what it is, you look at the types of, okay, poets and writers and lyricists, and okay, and then just go in for a little bit, hands on heart and belly, which is what I always do, and close my eyes and really focus on what that is. What is linguistic, and say it in your mind and see if it speaks to your body. See if it resonates. And if it does, then it's go take a course and really lean into that more. So it's really about just opening that initial door to the exposure and then taking one by one isolated and seeing what feels right, and then taking action towards that to developing and deepening it.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point. Okay. So it's really about seeing what feels right and leaning into that
Yeah.
and exploring that more and discovering what that means for you and how you can really use it to continue to grow. So I think that's good stuff. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think would be, let me see how I want to ask this. What becomes possible for us when we awaken our emotional intelligence?
Yeah. So many things. I feel that when we have that connection and we are awakened, we can really live authentically, which can be scary because it requires us to really get to know the source of our fear, the source of our limiting belief, the source of our anxiety. What does that come from? Why do I feel this way? What brought me to this place? Looking within, turning within, it can be terrifying. And I totally understand that. But when we do, and when we step into that courage, then so much happens for us because we start to realize who we are. We start to get confident with who we are because we spend time doing the work. And then as a result of all of that, you design a life that feels aligned. So many of us follow a path. Society says, my parents say, generations tell me, we can break free from all of that when we tap in and turn in to ourselves and really learn who we are. For me, I had awakened to all of this. I got very confident with all of this. And I was in a 20-year marriage that was beautiful, 2 children, and to me, very successful. And did we go to the end? What is the end? Society says there's a distance, there's a longevity to make a successful marriage. But to me, my 20 years was completely successful and I needed something different, and for a variety of reasons. And I had to make a choice. And it was my authentic choice, not what this person said or that person believed. And that was tough. I mention that because that's what becomes possible, not necessarily leaving a marriage, but making a change in your life, whether it's a job or shifting the dynamic of a relationship or making a move or starting a family or all the transitions, all the opportunities for change. That is the biggest thing that becomes possible when we are connected to our emotional intelligence. Inside our emotions lives the wisdom, the resource, the like one main hub of resource that we tend to turn away from. And it's the most important. So if you're ready, it's like I work a lot with people that are on the brink of change, that want to make a shift in their life, but are scared, worried, all the things. And I get it because I was there. I totally lived it. And this safe space allows people to understand why, where all of that comes from, and then step into the confidence to make those really bold choices that might be made alone. You might wind up walking a path by yourself, but at the end of the day, if it's your truth, this is your life. So bringing people home to their body and their truths so that they can step forward with authenticity and leadership, that's what really becomes possible.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you so much, Jen, really for pointing out the truth of that is that when we see who we can become through recognizing who we are, we don't have to follow paths that have been laid out, like from our parents or society or whatever, and accept who we are and what it is we want to do with this life, this possibly one and only life that we have.
In this
So
body.
that's yes, exactly, right. So thank you for sharing that with us. That's lovely. I think a lot of us get stuck in that
Yeah.
this is how it's always been done. This is what I need to do. And if I don't, then it isn't right. It isn't successful. I didn't win at life or whatever. And it doesn't have to be that way if that's not true for you. And so I think that this is amazing to give people an opportunity to explore that and discover what really is true for them and should be the life that they lead
Yep.
and live. So awesome.
I appreciate that. I think sometimes to hear it and we need to be given the permission to do it. That's why it's important to have these conversations so that people can resonate and say, "Oh wow. Okay, I can do that. It's okay." Yeah.
Yeah. And the point you made about self discovery is it is very scary. If you've never stopped to ask yourself any questions about who you are or what you want, it can be incredibly scary because you're maybe cracking open a whole thing that was never examined before. And the life that you're living may not be the life that you really truly want. And without that self exploration, you're not going to discover that. But that's incredibly scary. So
Yeah.
I recognize that for a lot of people, they don't want to do that kind of work because it's so scary.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I encounter it all the time. And I think you've got to make a choice. It kind of just comes, it's scary and all the things. And I'm not a black and white person at all. I'm very gray and flowy, but this is kind of a black and white moment. It's like, I'm ready and it doesn't mean I'm ready to make a change. It means I'm ready to get curious. That's all it is. And I'm actually writing a book right now and it's all about this. And in there, I was just writing about this last night that it's the curiosity that's really the first step. You don't have to take that's action, actually. That is taking action. But you don't have to make some bold, big decision. It's just let me learn. Let me become the student of my life. Let me understand who I am. And then I'll make some choices. And that's where that empowerment comes in, that confidence, that ability to map out a plan. But that doesn't happen initially. It doesn't have to. It can be a soft launch.
Yeah. Yeah, what a great way to say it though, and you're absolutely right. Just being curious is that form of action that you take initially. You're not jumping off a cliff,
Right.
here we are, and then tomorrow I'm jumping off a cliff. You're examining and just exploring and
Yeah,
looking at, and that could lead to
that's
changes
right.
or a different path.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. That's really important for people to know and realize because I think it puts people at ease.
Yes. Yeah. Good stuff, Jen. Okay. So, I want to ask you, as I love to ask all of my guests, if there are books or podcasts that they enjoy reading, listening to, if you've been finding it beneficial or influential that you think that the listener should check out. Do you have some you'd like to share?
Yes. So I have had my own like spiritual awakening over the last 3 years. And every single month, I'm a big Audible person. I listen to a new book. And I have just, it has changed my life. And so there are many, but what I will say is the Wayne Dyer library is is just an absolute must. There are so many books that he has written and spoke on. He does a lot of tapes that have not been transcribed to book form and a lot that are both. Anything Wayne Dyer is phenomenal. And there's something called the Ultimate Library. And I believe that's only audio. I'm not sure. And that's a must. His voice is also incredible and so transformative. I'll read or listen to some authors and I'm like, oh, not so. The voice might not. I'd rather read the book. To me, his voice is heaven. So I would say anything Wayne Dyer. I also really enjoy a lot of Gabby Bernstein's work and some of her books, that anything under the Hay House umbrella. Hay House, you probably know, for those of you that don't, it's a publishing company that really gears itself towards like spirituality and self-help, beautiful books, authors. Nancy Levin, her books are incredible. So I would say under that umbrella, and specifically for me, Wayne Dyer, Louise Hay, You Can Heal Your Life. There's a lot under there. I mean, she's the one that started the whole thing. And then I love Brene Brown. Brene Brown's podcast and her books are incredible. And who doesn't love Oprah Winfrey and Deepak Chopra? All these like spiritual. I love The Power of Now, which is a beautiful book about really the power of now. Really, it's like the power of gesture. So I would say those. I mean, I could go on, but anything in that kind of realm is really where I gravitate to.
Yeah, fabulous recommendations for sure. And absolutely love all of that. I've read a number of Wayne Dyer's books and love Gabby Bernstein as well and Louise Hay. And they just had an event not too long ago, if you're listening to this live, in Phoenix. And it was a big event. I Can Do It. And it was
Yes.
all Hay House. Nancy Levin got to hear her speak, and her story is fantastic. The work that she's doing on recognizing
Shadow
the
work.
darkness
Yeah.
and accepting the darkness because it's part of the light, and really becoming a whole and accepting that part of ourselves as well. So fabulous stuff. So I will link all of that info in the show notes and the podcast as well. So thank you for that. Fan of Brene Brown, love her work as well. So good
Yeah.
stuff.
Nice. I love that.
Yeah. Well, Jen, before we close out, would you share with the listeners how they can find you, dig into what you're working on, ask you any questions, work with you? I know you've got some wonderful programs that you are doing and also some freebies that you wanted to share with the listeners. So please share that with us now.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll start with the freebies first because they're easy downloads. If you go to my website, www.jenaks.com, on there it says start your journey here. And you can get it's a 4-part series that introduces you to the power of gesture and how it works. And it's great. It's there now. So we can have that. And I'm going to have something else, which is my coaching program, which is Embodied, Empowered, Elevated. That's the journey I take people on. And I did a mini video that's about 20 minutes that introduces you to that journey, which takes me to the programs and the coaching. It's all around those 3 elements. First, becoming embodied. What is embodiment? What is the power of gesture? Accessing embodiment through that methodology. Becoming empowered, right? We talked about once you're embodied, once you understand you're in alignment with who you are and the truth of who you are, we can start to take real action and create a plan that really gets you towards your goals and all of that. And then living elevated, which is really the next level. It's service. It's I'm whole here and I'm ready to serve. So that's the journey I take people on in all of my coaching. And I have privates. I also do workshops. People bring me in a lot. Coaches bring me in to do a culmination experience for a journey that they've been on for 3, 6, 9 months. I'll do workshops at retreats or educational facilities, things like that. So all the things, the best way to reach me is email, jen@jenaks.com, or through Instagram. That's where I kind of live the most when I'm on social media. And that's Jen_Aks, AKS. And those are the things.
Awesome. I will for sure include all the details in the show notes so that the listeners can easily find you. And thank you again for sharing that with us and giving those freebies to us so generously. Thank you, Jen. It's been wonderful having you on this show. It's just a treasure trove of fantastic information. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Well, we'll talk more soon.
Yes.
Thank you, dear listeners, for tuning in to another insightful episode of the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. We appreciate your time and curiosity as we explore fascinating topics together. If you enjoyed today's discussion, be sure to join us next week for another amazing episode. Remember, your journey of learning and growth is a continuous adventure, and we're thrilled to be part of it. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next week, stay curious and keep exploring those pockets of knowledge.